I scraped every question people in tech are asking about ditching their underpaid perm job and breaking into consulting. Today I'm giving real answers, not fluff, based on 12 years in cyber consulting and scaling to 52K a month solo. So let's get into this thing. So question 1, how many months of runway before going full time? Now, 3 to 6 months is your easy buffer. You always want to make sure that you have some savings. But if I had to start all of this stuff over, what I would do is I would first go to people that I know before I actually quit my job. I would assess the landscape. I'd do some research, figure things out to see where I'm going to go. Once I got my understanding of what the market wants, then I would assess who I can speak to. Do I know any people who can provide me something a lot faster than any other methodology out there like cold outreach and things like that? Because obviously these people know you, which means there's far less friction because trust is already established between two parties. So instead of worrying about what you're going to do once you quit, think about what you can do before you actually quit. How can you create enough leverage for yourself to get you where you want to go as fast as possible so that when you do quit, you can actually just jump straight into a new role. And something on this is that depending on your region and your country, you could even contract directly for your own employer. And the reason that they would be interested in that is because it's far more tax efficient for them to hire a contractor as opposed to a permie, because you have sick pay, you have holidays, you have taxes that they need to pay on top of you for the fact that they're employing you. So there's lots of different avenues that you can explore. And I have tons of videos on this in my YouTube channel if you check them out. Then we get on to question 2. Can I start consulting while still employed full time? Yes, you can. This is kind of similar to the first question. There are a few things that you need to consider though. 1, whoever you're working for at the time, you're going to have a contract with them, obviously. And you need to find out if in your contract it's okay for you to do that. Easiest way to do that is to just chuck it into AI after you've redacted it and find out if there are any red flags that would prevent you from doing this. Then obviously you need to get permission from them, depending on your relationship and how you want to actually go about doing this thing, because for them, they don't want you to be doing other client work during their time. So as long as you set the boundary and say, hey, I'll be doing whatever I'm paid to do during your work window, but outside of that, I would like to do other work. Then you would ask yourself, when do you actually do this? And depending on your working hours, which you could potentially shift with your current employer, otherwise you do it in the evenings or you do it on weekends and you find contracts in other time zones and things like that. There's always a different way to do something. So always assess the situation before you're about to go into it. And don't just think, hey, I can't do this thing because reasons. There are 2 types of people. There are people who think, I can do this and I'm going to find a way to do this. Or there are people who find reasons not to be able to do the thing that they actually want to do when it's really just because they're too afraid. Then we get on to question 3. How many billable hours for 25K a month? That is a super loaded question because obviously it's region dependent. If you're in London, New York, San Francisco, you can easily make that money because your day rate would be so high. But in other places, you might get less. So it all comes down to 1, whatever the market is telling you people are paying roundabout, and then the value that you can create for yourself. So value perception is obviously massive. And that as a consultant, that's one of the biggest things that you actually need to learn to manipulate, because clients are going to be paying you for these outcomes. But specifically, you need to make yourself look like the most valuable product on the market so that you can manipulate that perception and attach it to the outcome that you provide for these people. And what that means is just making yourself look like you're wrapped in a pretty bow so that you can charge the highest price. Now, if you're doing the more traditional form of consulting, where you're going to a larger business or an enterprise, you're typically going to charge a day rate. Even though the back end is still hours, you work in a day rate just so that it's easier for you and whoever the hell you're speaking to understand it better. So let's just work on $1,000 a day. You can see that if you're doing $1,000 a day, the average month has about 22 days in it, so you would make 22 grand just on that alone. So in order for you to get to that 25K, you would either have to take on more than one client or use more than one pricing model. So you can either just use T&M, which is time and materials like we're speaking about here, where you're selling your time for money. And you can couple that with perhaps productizing a solution. If you've already automated something that you know a client would use over and over again in the same way, you can productize that, in which case you could make up for the fact that you only have 22 days of the year that you can charge for. And then the other 3 days are productized, and therefore you can make up the extra money to get you to 25K. The other ways that you could do this is obviously remote work. So if you're working in your region, $25,000 may not be realistic. The point of this being is that If you're in one of the bigger cities, it's a lot easier to get to that because your day rate would be closer to 1,500 to 2,000 a day, in which case you would have to work a lot less. But if you can't do that, then obviously you have to tie it to different pricing models, or you have to tie it to another way of working or working more days, or selling other people's time, which is obviously the most efficient way to do this so that you can decouple yourself from the business entirely. In which case you would be selling them for a day rate or 2 or 3 of them in order to hit this 25K. And that's exactly what I did when I went down this route. So I started selling T&M for $1,000 a day, and then it went up to 1,500 a day, and then it gets closer to 2,000 now that I'm in New York City, because London was a cheaper day rate than it is in New York. But on top of that, when I was in London and I was scaling to over 50K a month, what I was doing is selling other contractors' times through one of my own businesses, and I was selling 2 or 3 of them to a client at a time, coupled with my T&M, and you can see how easily you can actually get to 50K or way more. Next up, question 4. Should I publish my rates on my website? I wouldn't do that. There's only one time I would do that, and that's if I had a retainer pricing model. So if I was going down like a subscription route where I'm selling my time fractionally to a bunch of different clients, I might put it on there just to let them know what they're getting out of the offer. So I'd have something like, for $10,000 a month, you get direct access to me for 2 days a week, and a whole bunch of other things listed there. It's pretty straightforward. It's more of a subscription model, so there's less mystery about needing to create this insane value proposition before you talk about a 6-month contract type of thing, as you see more in traditional consulting. Whereas if I was doing what people normally do in consulting, where, I take on a 6-month contract, I go into a business and I might change their entire SOC or something like that, that's a very different sell, because 1, the sales cycle on that is very long, but 2, it's more tailored towards a much larger company than people who might be buying these 10K retainers and things like that. So I want to keep that stuff off my website and keep it more aligned with discovery calls and sales calls and things like that, so that I can align my positioning to whatever it is that they need. And that way, when I tell them, hey, it's $2,000 a day, it's a lot less of a hit because I show them all the value up front. I show them the outcome that they're going to get, and I walk them through how I'm going to get them there. So I get to sell them this amazing dream, tell them about this amazing offer in person, and then I talk about price. And it also means that they're not immediately going to click off my website when they see $2,000. They're going to talk to me about it, and on the call they might say no. But no isn't finality. You can still beat the objections. You can find out what the objection really is, and then you can help get to the price point that you want. Now, question 5. Why would anyone pay me consultant rates for skills I already use at work? And that's a really good question, because I asked myself that when I started, and tons of people ask that question when they start. But it all comes down to value perception, which I've mentioned in some of the earlier parts of this video. The better you are at manipulating someone's perception, the more you get from or out of people. Now, when you're a permanent employee, you're literally seen as this person who, your role is this, and you are going to clock in between 9 and 5 and do this thing for the business. That is your lane, and you stay in it. When you're a consultant, you're not just like a person anymore. You're a product, a service. You are an established business with a brand, and you go there to deliver specific outcomes to a business. You're no longer clocking in at 9 till 5 to be a SOC analyst. You're going in there as this person who revolutionizes their entire SOC, solving $1 million problem and preventing threats and whatever other labels you want to attach to it. The point being is that you're no longer attached to these menial tasks that most permanent employees are unfortunately attached to. You're more attached to this amazing value-based outcome that people think is this huge problem that needs to be solved. So truthfully, another part of this is that from a technical perspective, your skills are exactly the same. I would say the majority of consultants are actually far less skilled technically than the people who are actually already on site. The difference is that consultants know how to sell themselves, how to package themselves, and most importantly, how to deal with people, because people are what get you the price that you want. People are who open the doors for you. So the better you are at people, the more you're going to get from them. And that doesn't mean that you're just there to take from people. It means that part of this game is that you really need to make friends with people, genuine relationships. That's what it's all about. Asking the right questions, getting to know people, and things like that. Because that's how you get those big rates that you actually want to get. And also what separates you from just being an employee who reads your job description and then applies to it. Then we get on to question 6. What if I can't answer a question to a customer? And this is an amazing fear because, 1, everyone has it. And it's this cognitive distortion that your brain likes to use against you. And the way that it does it is, it says, if I don't do this thing, I'm a failure or a fraud, and therefore I'm going to end up on the street, and my family's going to leave me. And, it scales down until pretty much it ends with death. That's how fear works. But it really is one of the simplest things to solve. Because firstly, you just ask yourself, is it rational for any human to know everything? And the answer is obviously no. Some of the smartest people I know don't even know everything, and sometimes they ask me questions, and I sit there wondering, why are you asking me when I think you're the smartest person I know? So a lot of people might think that they should know everything, but a lot of smart clients don't expect you to know everything. Some clients obviously expect you to know more than what you think is reasonable, but there are ways around that. One of the things I like to do, and it's one of the oldest tricks in the books, is to just say, I need to check on this to make sure that I provide you the right solution. Instead of saying, I don't know, you're telling them that you're going to get them where it is that they want to go. You just want to make sure that you're doing the right thing. There are other little sneaky things you can do if you're working specifically with softwares and things like that. You could say things like, oh, the version's changed since they've implemented that. A lot of things have moved on. I need to make sure that I'm implementing the right solution for you. Give me 10 minutes. Another important way to do this is to always attach a timeline to it. Don't just say, I don't know, I need to find out, and then wander off. Always set a timeline. Give me a few minutes, give me an hour. I just want to confirm this with a senior architect, whatever. As long as you're showing them that you're going to ultimately lead them to a solution, it's perfectly reasonable to tell them that you don't know an answer. Just make sure it's not for every answer, obviously. You need to assess a project that you're about to take on, how much of the knowledge you don't have, how quickly can you get yourself up to speed, and then what are you going to do when there's ultimately a question that you don't know how to answer, in which case you do something like this. And keep in mind that if you don't know an answer, if you're a part of a community or you're part of forums and things like that, you're going to have people who will know the answer. And there's obviously AI now. It was a lot scarier when I started doing this and I literally had to read manuals. So you guys are off to a good start. One more thing on this where this question can become relevant, and that's during interviews, especially the technical ones. If you don't know an answer, that's perfectly fine. But don't just stop and not say anything after that. What I would do if I don't know an answer, I would try and show the people my thought patterns. So a lot of the time, a CTO just wants to see how you break down a complex problem. Even if they know nobody is ever going to know the answer to this, they want to see where you would start. For instance, if they were talking about troubleshooting their environment, the first place you look is generally always the logs because it's going to tell you something. So you could start off by saying, well, I don't know the exact answer, but if I had to work through it myself, I would probably start over here in the logs, and then I would go over there and I would check these permissions. I would look in the audit log, whatever. And you slowly build your way up so that the CTO can see, okay, cool. So he doesn't know the answer, but this guy knows how to think. And that's the most important thing for me. Question 7. Do I need a website before prospecting? Of course you don't. But the caveat with this is that it's so easy to make one nowadays, so why wouldn't you have one? You can just get something like Lovable or Hostinger, and they can create you a website in less than an hour. It doesn't need to look like Apple's website. It just needs to show who you are, what you do, show off some awesome credentials that's really easy to get hold of you, contact page, link it with Calendly, super fast, super sleek. There's no reason why you wouldn't have it. But if we come back to addressing the question, no, you don't need one, because most of the time, apart from going to your warm leads first and going down that awesome route of getting your first client through people that you actually know, when it comes down to speaking to these people, you're going to be reaching out to strangers or anyone really on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is going to be your most important tool, and you want to make sure that your LinkedIn page is amazing. It tells people exactly who you are, what you're about, how you provide value to them, how you take them away from a place of pain to a place of happiness, and you look like the Messiah. And then to wrap it all up on the back end, I would just have Notion to kind of manage some clients at first. When you're starting out, you don't really need a fully fledged CRM. It would be a nice to have, but it's definitely not needed. You can use something like Notion for that. But in no way would I ever stop what I'm doing to not go prospecting if I didn't have a website. I would just build one in an hour. Question 8. How many outreaches per day to land your first client? Again, loaded question, maybe even a trick question. Because if I had to do this, I'm going to go to my warm leads first, in which case I'm going to make something called a tiny list, where I would take the 20 most likely people, 1, to get back to me, but 2, fit the thing that I'm trying to get into, and 3, the ones that I might have most leverage with, like how close a friend am I with them, how willing are they going to be to help me, and things like that. You want to factor those in. Because some people you might message who you think you were quite friendly with once upon a time, and they're just going to ghost you. So the way I would do this is I wouldn't just go and then say, hey, I'm doing this thing now, help me. That's terrible, because it also puts your friend in a weird position. So I'd make this list of people who are most likely going to get back to me, and I'd approach them as if I'm trying to find out what they're doing, find out about their life. Maybe you even check some posts that they've done, whatever they've been doing, talk about that for a while, and then slide in whatever it is that you're doing. Just say, do you know anyone looking for something in this? I'm doing this now. And that way you're not directly asking them for anything. You're just telling them to let other people know that you're doing this thing. So coming back to how many outreaches a day, if you didn't have that opportunity, what I would do is I would say between 20 and 30, but it depends on how many you can hyper-personalize at scale, because that kind of limits you to your thing, right? That is the only constraint, is how many you can hyper-personalize. You don't just want to throw a bunch of stuff to the wall like, hey, I'm a cybersecurity consultant or a DevOps consultant, I can help you. That's the worst way to do it. You need to find some pain points that these people have. Can you find any common ground with these people? Can you personalize the email exactly to this person so that when they read it, they think, oh my God, this person knows my soul. The more you can do that, the more likely they are to get back to you. And that's why we got the number of 20 to 30 people. But if you can automate it, that number increases rapidly. And you can entirely automate this. I've built a system for this. I have a video on exactly how to do that. The point being is that you need to make sure your emails or your DMs on LinkedIn and stuff, they need to be relevant. They need to be specific. And then you just need to repeat that process every single day. It sounds simple, but relevance and repetition are what lead to results. More so if these people are warm. Always start there. Then we get on to question 9, how the time flies. Do I need an LLC before my first client? If you're in the UK, an LLC is just an LTD. So you don't need one for your first client, but the caveat again being that by the time it comes down to you signing service agreements, you will have to have a business unless you want to go down the sole proprietor route. But if you're selling yourself as a consultant to a business, they're going to look at you and say, okay, cool, you're a business. We have a service agreement with your business. What's its name? And if you don't have one, you don't have a registered company, you can't have a service agreement with these people. So you got to keep that in mind. So technically you don't need one, but by the time it comes to signing papers, you absolutely need one. And the second thing onto this is they're so easy to establish now. If you're in the UK, your accountant will offer it as part of their service. If you're in the US, you can use something like Zen Business. I used that remotely from the UK before I moved here 4 months ago. And they were able to set up my entire business remotely, even though I didn't actually live here yet. So I can only imagine how easy it is for people who do live here. Although I did have to send a fax because apparently it's still $19.99 here with banking and some business stuff. But the point being, it's super fast to get set up. It took me 3 days. In the UK, it's even faster. So this question kind of becomes moot because why would you not set up a company? Maybe you have some kind of personal constraint, but you got to keep in mind that when it comes down to tax as well, this is super important. Because if you didn't have an LLC and you were going down the sole proprietor route, you need to keep in mind that you're not then tax efficient and you're going to lose just as much money as if you were personally employed. So keep that in mind. Then finally, we get on to question 10. What's the difference between freelancing and consulting? And that's a pretty good question because it gets kind of mixed up a lot of the time. I would view a freelancer as someone who takes on a specific task, and a consultant is someone who solves a big problem that leads to a massive outcome with tons of value behind it. That's not to say that what freelancers do aren't valuable. Those tasks can obviously still be valuable, and they can obviously still make a bunch of money. But the point being is that if I look at it from another analogy, a freelancer is like a mercenary who goes into East Africa to kill a warlord, whereas a consultant would be the general of the army that leads the entire army into battle and hopefully victory. A lot of people confuse the term and they mix freelancing with consulting. They use it interchangeably, but it's super important to understand the difference because one is far more valuable than the other. Again, you can make money freelancing, but you can make way more money in consulting because of all the different value propositions and the positioning that you have when you're a consultant and you have your own business and you have some staff behind you and all of those things. It's a very different game to play, especially when it comes down to the types of problems that are solved and the length of them and the complexity and the price that you can attach to those problems. If you want to find out more in-depth answers about any of the questions in this video, I've recorded a ton of videos on most of the stuff already. You can see them right now on the screen. Otherwise, leave some comments below about any questions you might have that I already haven't found online, and I'll answer them as fast as possible. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next video.